Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us in the world. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to myself and a special guest speaker talk about intelligently simple edge protection for Nutanix with HYCU. So my name is Chris Rogers. I'm a senior product marketing manager at HYCU, and I predominantly look after our hybrid cloud portfolio, so Nutanix and Dell, and then all the rest of the stuff you can imagine that goes around the side of that. And I'm pleased that I am joined today by Kevin from Nutanix. So Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself, give yourself a glowing introduction?
I'm not sure about a glowing introduction, Bess, but I shall definitely try to introduce myself articulately anyway. So yes, Kevin McGarvey, or Kev, or whatever you like to call me, really. So I'm an advisory systems engineer with Nutanix. So what that kind of means for my accounts and my prospects that I work with is that I help them through the myriad of technical solutions that are available through the Nutanix portfolio. Um,
Amazing.
so yeah, there you go. That was it. Short and sweet.
Amazing, amazing. I'm really glad to have you with me today. And so yeah, we're going to be talking about edge protection or robo as it used to be called back in the day, right? As edge or robo, but essentially the same type of use cases, right? Data out at the edge. How can we protect it properly, and how can we make sure it's not just protected, but it's running properly as well? So a little bit on the agenda. I'm going to cover kind of just have a discussion on what is robo. Actually, before we get into the agenda, I just want to make sure that anyone who has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the QA. We'll try and monitor that as we go along. If not, we'll definitely have time at the end for some questions and an answer. So please make it interactive as possible. It makes mine and Kevin's job a lot easier if we talk about things that you guys want to hear about. And a brief bit of admin. Yes, you will get a recording. Yes, there will be an on-demand link for you and your colleagues to use whenever you like to. So yeah, so in the agenda, what is Robo and Edge? We're going to kind of just have a brief explanation of what that means, because I think Edge gets used a lot in various things, and Edge could mean, my webcam I've got monitoring my greenhouse or whatever, or it could mean, an oil rig or a solar farm or something else, or those types of things. And then we're going to go through the challenges of Edge to data protection, and then understanding Robo and Edge with Nutanix, where Kevin's going to shine and give us all the insights we need from Nutanix and how they deal with Robo sites. And then the last thing we're going to do is how to level up your edge sites, how to level up data protection at those edge sites with Nutanix and HYCU combined. So let's dive straight in. So firstly, what is Robo? What is Edge, right? So I've got the world map here, as you can see, and I've got my data center in the UK. I'm from the UK, so I've decided that that's where our main data center for our company is going to be hosted. Typically, we're going to have, maybe a DC or two DCs, maybe, 10 kilometers apart or 100 kilometers apart, whatever it might be, but we're going to have some sites. And then what happens when we start expanding, right? We're going to start expanding into this place, and we're going to go to this place, and we're going to go across the world. And we're going to start expanding all these different sites all around the world. And some of these might be headquarters, some of these might be just branch offices, some of these might be manufacturing sites, or some of these might be oil rigs in the sea. It could, as I mentioned, it's really diverse. But as we start playing around with all these different things, we have challenges at the edge, right? So in your experience, Kevin, what's the most, I'm going to say common, maybe common, but can you give us an example of, like, where Nutanix has potentially deployed edge systems? What type of environments, what type of customers? It's probably going to be, you're probably going to answer every customer, but you've got any kind of, shining lights of where people have deployed these and kind of what industries they're in.
Okay, yeah. There's actually quite a good number of use cases really for the robo. So we can either talk about shops, yeah. So you can have branch offices across the whole country if you like, but they only need a certain amount of resource for like print servers, domain controllers, a couple of other application servers, nothing too intensive.
Hmm.
So it's on that end of the scale. But for my account specifically, we're talking a lot of on boats, on oil rigs, on offshore wind farms, on onshore wind farms and solar energy. But it's everything from so Robo's remote office, branch office, right? So it's wherever that is, really. Small requirements, but they need to have local resource, and it's just what makes sense for the customers and prospects out there.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. It can be so diverse. It can be shops, it could be oil rigs, so everyone in every line of business is probably going to have a remote site somewhere potentially.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not specific to the energy industry. It's not specific to manufacturing or logistics or those. They're really heavy users of Robo, but actually we see organizations who are in every single industry. I did one a call with a customer the other week, and it was a dentist practice, right? They had their main
Absolutely.
main
Yeah.
one, but they had dentists all over the country, and all of them needed a local instance of the line of business application they're running. Plus, as you said, like the essentials, the prints, the stuff. They didn't need anything huge, nothing massive, but equally they want it to run properly and not be on, not feel like a second class citizen, as typically robo sites have been in the past. So if
Yeah.
we move on to the challenges that we see at the edge or in robo sites, um, so I've had a little bit of fun with the imagery and AI here. So I use this stuff. So the first one you can see here, the first challenge we're going to be discussing is the lack of suitable data center footprint. If we just take the example I just had there, right, a dentist, primarily they're not in the business of running data centers, right? They're not going to have a whole space, that's got cooling and power and all these types of thing, to maybe host a whole rack like it has in this toilet here in my imagery, right? But typically that's what happens, right? So either they end up with things stuffed under the stairs. I've seen it in cleaning cupboards before and those types of things. And typically, obviously, that's not a great thing. Is there anything that you want to come in and comment on this, Kevin, in terms of what Nutanix can do, or I know that we're going to discuss kind of like how many nodes and those types of things, but I think typically people think of you know enterprise grade IT as being this thing
Yeah.
in this huge rack, but that's not really the case, is it?
No, not at all. So putting all the hardware and the technology and the software stack to one side, sometimes it does just boil down to the fact that in these remote locations, and they could be, I don't know, they could be literally out in the middle of nowhere. So, it's not going to be that easy for someone to leave their city or leave wherever they're working from and travel hours in a car or wherever it was to be able to do something because it may literally be a small office environment. They've got no rack space. Or if they do have rack space, it might be short depth. There's any number of different requirements that can affect the footprint. And obviously, with these small rooms, making sure that you have a small enough footprint can also drive efficiencies on things like cooling and air and power requirements as well. So they all sort of kind of all feed into the architecture.
Yeah, and the thing that I want to kind of make sure people are aware is like, yes, you might be deploying in. I'm gonna call it suboptimal, right? But it's what's at the site is available. Obviously, they choose the most suitable site. Obviously, Kevin from Nutanix will help you size the nodes and make sure we're in line with power and cooling requirements. But equally, that potentially puts data at risk a bit more, right? Because they're not running. Maybe they're running a bit hotter than ideal, if you will, right? They may be
Mm.
not in a completely isolated, clean environment. There might be a bit of dust around and that type of things, right? So we need to make sure that we have data that's being stored at the edge or being processed at the edge, that's protected as well. So we need to just make sure
Absolutely.
understand that the data that is stored there could be, I'm not saying it is higher risk, but it could be, right? There's environmental factors we need to take into account. Inside of data centers, we have backup policies and we will back up all this data, and they're running in optimal conditions with the right temperatures, low humidity, no dust, clean environments. Whereas if we're
Yeah.
running at the edge, that might not be the case. If they're on boats or in fields or on oil rigs, right? That they are going to get, more humid. They might be in a dirtier environment. So we just need to
I
make that
think
case.
I think just to jump in there, Chris, as well, I think a lot of folk, when they think about edge, they don't necessarily think that it's necessarily running critical infrastructure, but that could be quite the opposite.
Agree.
If we're talking about, I'm going to pick on the energy sector as a
Hmm.
for an example. If a robo environment is placed on the edge, it's obviously participating in some critical edge functionality there. And without that, you might have folk losing power. They might be going without any kind of utility. So, although it's at the edge, should never be forgotten about, and it should always be treated with certain respect. And you could be at the end of the day still running critical workloads on that.
100% agree. 100% agree. I think we'll talk about it in a bit more detail in a
Yeah.
little bit when I get onto my next few of my cool AI images that I created. So I've got a 28K modem with a frayed port on here as well. So the second challenge we want to discuss today is poor networking capabilities. And that's not from a rubbish modem or a or a frayed cable, right? That's probably going to be because they are, guess what, remote, right? They're edge sites. They're out there for a reason, right? You might not have the 100 gig lines and the dark fiber available to you in these environments. If we took Kevin's example earlier on boats, right? They're probably working off a satellite because guess what? Boats move, right? Right? They can't have a tethered cable to them, right? So they're
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
running off radio or satellite connections, right? So
Mhm.
they're not going to be able to have big data dumps, right? Because the network is consistent, but it's going to be relatively low speed comparatively to what your data center is going to have, right?
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that anything we do at the edge is efficient. And that especially matters when it comes to data protection, right? Typically, again, typically when you use air quotes here, data protection is done overnight. We do a big data dump overnight, try and get it done before the business comes back online in the morning, right? But on these slow lines, that may not be possible to do the traditional way of data protection, and or even just disaster recovery as well. So I'm gonna all that type of business continuity piece. It might have to be done a slightly different way. And
Mhm.
again, we can talk about that, but yeah, I think networking is an interesting one. Network speeds are going up, but there are places in the world that physically can't get networks too, right, Kevin?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yes.
Exactly that. So we're going to talk a little bit in a little more detail about how we can help with the networking challenge there at remote sites, and then we move on to the third one, which is the management overhead. So again, I've got the cleaner here trying to figure out their command line and figuring out probably someone in the phone telling her to press the control delete and restart some stuff, right? But these things do happen. As we mentioned, it's probably not going to be practical for folk to drive 5 hours to their remote site from their DC just to power off, power on, or update or upgrade those types of things, right? So we need to have kind of centralized management, centralized reporting, monitoring, maintenance, all those types of things are going to be super important. Um, again, we go back to the boat scenario. I think it's just a great one. So I'm going to come back to that again. If you've got people, you don't want to be staffing IT staff on boats, right? Because
Mhm.
99.9% of the time they're going to be sat there doing absolutely nothing, right? But for the one time, that 1% that they are needed, we need to make sure that we have that remote capability available. How do we make sure that we simplify everything down as much as possible so that anything that's on the boat is as simple and as easy as possible, and it can be done remotely without the need of physical hands. Occasionally, yes, someone might trip over a power lead. We have to get someone to plug in a power lead. Occasionally, those things do happen, but for the vast majority of tasks, we want to make sure that we do things centrally and simply as well. So making sure we don't have our our enterprise grade stack sat there, but then we have to deploy even more kit just to back it up, or even more stuff just to have resilience, all those types of things. So we need to make sure that that footprint is as low as possible, but it equally meets the expectations of the users and the consumers of that for that critical edge infrastructure. Anything else to add, Kevin, set up to that point?
No, I think you've pretty much covered all the points that I was just thinking of, actually, Chris. So
It's
yeah,
almost
very
like we
good.
rehearsed this, Kevin, eh? So the next challenge we're going to do is the lack of enterprise grade equipment. I think this is slowly on the change as we realize that edge data is critical, as we've discussed already. But I'm a seasoned. I've been a sysadmin for a while, and then I moved in through different phases of my career through different places. I've been sent to sites where there is just a PC sat on someone's desk, and I go, "Hey, I'm here to look at the server," and they go, "Oh yeah, it's there," and I go,
Mm.
well, that thing, yeah, that's the server. Oh, and that does everything in here. Yeah, that's it. Oh, and suddenly we need to start thinking about edge data as being that super critical, not second class citizens. We need to make sure we up level everything to enterprise grade, enterprise ready at the point that we're storing data on these systems, or even processing data, storing client data, all that type of stuff. We need to make sure it's resilient and it's got good uptime. It's it's got the right equipment that can handle load. It can scale if it needs to scale. I've seen sites, and again, Kevin, I'm sure you have customers you might be able to talk about. I've seen sites where it was just a remote site, right? And
Yeah.
then the business grew, and the business grew, and the
Yeah.
business grew, and the business grew. And guess what? Suddenly that remote site is now their second headquarters, and
Yeah.
they're still running on there. They're still running on there because they didn't want to have to. They want to have to invest a huge brand new tech stack, right? But we need something that's scalable, easy to use, can scale up or down, right? Maybe it is a
Yeah.
headquarters that's been scaled back down, and it might get ramped up in the future, right? Maybe it's an oil field, and what it could be anything. So
Yeah.
I think having enterprise grade equipment and that isn't prone to failure. Obviously, you want to try and make sure failures don't happen. But tech does fail. We need to make sure that it doesn't fail as often, especially at
Yeah.
remote sites, because it's hard to get hands out there, right? So
Yeah.
have you got any? Oh, go on, Kevin. You
Yeah,
go.
no, no, so I've got a great use case here.
Okay.
So I think specifically we're talking IT, so information technology, but we shouldn't forget there's the OT side, so there's the operational technology side. So I speak to a lot of folk who are, they've got the manufacturing plants, they're producing, they've got, so let's pick. So I work in Scotland, so I work with a lot of distillers, okay? And so bottle banks, if they really in that OT space, but they use the robo functionality, and that's operating machinery, right?
Mm,
And
yeah.
if again going back to the point about critical infrastructure, if they in the past they would just put in any server kind of equipment in there, and but that would be running. And I don't know if anyone's been on one of these bottling plants, but I was fortunate to visit one quite a few weeks ago. The level of automation is absolutely amazing, but if one little chink in the chain breaks, the whole thing just grinds to a halt. And the fact that they've employed these robo solutions with the performance and the resiliency built in with the critical infrastructure all lends itself well. So again, yeah, you really have to think about enterprise grade equipment. Otherwise, if something goes down, it's not just the fact that you've got folk coming to you saying, the systems are down. You could be losing an awful lot of money.
Yeah, especially in those industries where their primary function is something outside of IT, right? They're, as you
Yeah,
said, they're distillers, or one of my previous customers was um a microbrewery, right? They were brewing beer, and they had one
yeah,
VM that controlled everything, right? If that
yeah,
VM went
yeah,
down, then they couldn't do
yeah,
anything. The whole business was shut down based on
yeah,
IT, even though they had nothing to do with it, right? They had
yeah,
just just one thing that needed to operate their brewery. So
yeah.
yeah, it's amazing how quickly that it can affect operations from an IT perspective, right? That there is no analog businesses left really now. Even when I go to the barbers, right? I can't just walk into the barbers. I have to go on the app and book an appointment, right? I can't just walk in anymore. Everything is
Yeah,
digitized, right? So,
yeah,
we can't get away from that, and we have to make sure that our systems are robust and we give the client expectation and the client experience that we want all across, whether they're accessing from a remote site or a local DC or a central
yeah,
DC.
yeah, yeah.
And then the last challenge before we get into the meat of the presentation is going to be the the business continuity and backup kind of piece of it. This is obviously where HYCU specializes. But typically, when we talk about edge sites and robo sites, typically it's not important data. It doesn't matter if it's backed up or not, or if it's backed up, okay, once a week is fine, or however we can get it done. If it fails, or actually no, Gary from accounts, he just takes the hard drive home every night and we back it up every night that way, right? We just rotate hard drives in today's day and age, right, when most businesses are, data driven and data is the new oil, as everyone's, been saying for the last 10 or so years, if not more, we can no longer rely on Gary from accounts taking things home on a hard drive and putting them under his bed, right? We have to make sure that we
Yeah,
have solutions that are purpose built for edge, purpose built for
yeah,
for those environments where they are efficient, they are easy to use, they are simple, they don't expand footprint massively, but do protect data properly and do protect it in a way that the rest of the business is protecting their data. You know,
mm,
we talk about compliance as well. You know, the DORA regulations and NIST regulations and whatever regulatory body that you're under, those regulations don't just apply to your central data center, right? That applies to all
hmm,
data that you have, right? Whether that's in the cloud, SaaS apps, remote sites, or centralized DCs. So yes,
yeah,
you could be like, yeah, I've got the best backup product in the world backing up my central DC. Yeah, what are you doing for your robo sites? They're also processing and handling data. Oh yeah, we're not doing anything. Well,
mm,
suddenly you're at risk of being not compliant because your robo sites aren't being protected properly, right? So
yeah,
it wakes up a lot of people and go, oh my God, yeah, okay, maybe this maybe this robo thing is really important to me. Maybe I've been overlooking this for the past, 3, 5, 7, 12, 15 years, whatever it might be. But suddenly all it takes is someone to shine a new light on it and say, actually, you have to back that up. It's not
that's,
optional. You have to back that up. The law says, the regulation says you have to back it up. It's not optional. So obviously I put a tape drive in the middle of a solar field here. Probably not optimal, but we're going to talk about how HYCU and Nutanix do edge data protection in the next part of our our thing. We got a guy here looking really disappointed in his robo use case, obviously. So let's just quickly recap. So I know we've been talking for a little bit, but suboptimal conditions. We know that. We know that potentially the data is at higher risk because of conditional things. Poor network capabilities. How can we be more efficient on the network? We're going to discuss that. Large management overhead. How do we make sure that we simplify data protection and simplify edge in general? And then
Mm.
how do we make sure we're provisioning and deploying, I'm going to call it proper equipment, but enterprise grade, enterprise ready, even for those small sites where there's 2 or 3 workers, how do you make sure they're not treated any differently to the people who are running from the main HQ? And then business continuity, how we can ensure business continuity, backups, compliance, all those pieces for robo sites. So we're going to discuss Nutanix for Robo. Surprise, surprise. The guy in the Nutanix shirt is going to take this section.
Oh
And
no, I'm not.
but with I'm still going to have input. I've worked with Nutanix for a little while now. I understand they're offering pretty well. So yeah, Kevin, if you want to take away kind of this slide and kind of just give people an idea of and a flavor about what Nutanix do for Robo, because I think you've got a great story to tell. And it is differentiated because of the whole HCI concept that Nutanix have. I think it is massively differentiated in the marketplace. And so yeah, over to you. Feel free to grab me in for any comments or anything, but I'll leave it to you and you can explain the beauty that is Nutanix at the edge.
Bless you. Thank you very much. A great introduction. So there's a few things that I want to get across from a Nutanix point of view. So everything that we do is we've architected everything from the ground up, and that includes how we manage and how we operate, or how customers manage and operate Nutanix clustered environments. And that stretches from a single node robo, which we'll come on to later on, all the way through to multiple nodes of, any number of different nodes of complexity as well. But we want to make it easy. We want to be able to give customers that level of visibility, that IT operations that make the whole thing easy to manage, easy to monitor, and easy to scale and operate going forward. So that's the one of the key messages behind this slide, is that it is a full stack solution. So some folk on the call may be more familiar with our typical clustered environments where we start talking about networking, some microsegmentation. Customers may be running VDI environments with GPU support. They may be running a whole different range of enterprise applications. That is great on multiple nodes, but you have to remember, even when we're going down to this robo environment, it's the same feature set, it's the same level of functionality, it's the same level of support that you will get, whether it's a single node or multiple nodes in the environment. The other thing that you want to get across is the fact that Nutanix offer flexibility, right? So we want to be able to offer the customer the choice of providing that level of DR orchestration, whether it's you're taking a snapshot of a virtual machine and you retain that locally on your cluster. But then what can you do with it? And then we talk about, well, the idea, well, okay, well, you can send it to another site. You can send it to another physical on-premises cluster environment. That may itself be a single node robo target. Or we can start thinking about, well, I've got all of these remote sites. They're collecting data. It may actually be IoT data, AI data, but where am I going to place it? So we can start thinking about replicating that data to a data center or even a cloud provider. Nutanix recognize there are different types of data as well. So whether it's files, whether it's hot data, cold data, object data, there's any number of different different data for different applications and workloads. So again, just like the different enterprise applications that we can support, any number of different types of data, which is very important to customers. And that goes back to the point that Chris has been right. You've got to make sure that data is backed up, right, Chris?
Exactly that, yeah. And we touched briefly there on the flexible options.
Yeah.
I think this is where when I started learning about Nutanix and especially for their edge sites, it really hooked me because I was like, oh yeah, I've only heard of Nutanix in DCs, right, where it's like you need 6 nodes, 8 nodes, and I was like, well, you can't deliver that at the edge because even at 3 node, you're thinking, okay, maybe 3 nodes, but 3 servers for 2 people, it gets a bit, when servers start outweighing people, it starts getting, the
Yeah,
economics don't really work, right? But and then I started looking at the portfolio and understanding, oh my God, okay, you do small, medium, large, you do 1 node clusters, and I was absolutely blown away that you can do a 1 node cluster, which was awesome. So, do you want to take us through kind of like customer options and typically, why people choose small, medium, large? Again, that gets probably going to be down to cost, but yeah,
yeah,
run us through kind of like yeah, the small, medium, large options. What do people have? What do people use? And what can we
yeah.
run on there? What can't we run? Those types of things.
Okay, so there's two elements to this that I'm initially thinking of. It's one of those things that when I start talking, I'll start thinking about two elements, and then there'll be three, and then there'll be four. I'll try and keep that number low. So the first element is sizing is king. Okay, so when you're talking to your Nutanix account team, one of the first things that we'll do is we'll talk about sizing. What level of resource requirements do you need? Okay, and it may be that you'll need many virtual CPUs, quite a lot of compute. You've got quite a lot of storage. Then, of course, you're navigating towards that kind of large deployment. Typically, yes, the large deployment is 3 nodes, right? And then you can scale up to that. Um, but then, yes, to Chris's point, we also have the single node options and the medium 2 node options as well. I'll come on to the next slide in a moment where we talk about the advantages, if you like. There are some guardrails, there are some considerations of when you would go for a single node robo as opposed to a 2 node or even a 3 node. But this is built on the flexibility. Nutanix ourselves, we're hardware agnostic. So if you prefer Dell, if you prefer HPE, if you prefer any of the other hardware vendors that are available out there that we work with on a day-to-day business, um, you can pick and choose. And again, goes back to one of the previous slides with, when we're talking about the toilet server room. If you've got that small footprint, a lot of the vendors they do half depth. So you may only have a short depth rack space. You can talk about that. Some vendors they will talk about higher temperature. Okay, so a kit that can support, 30, 40, 50 degrees Celsius without actually exploding into flames or things like that. All right. So there's a couple of different things that you need to think about there. The last thing on this slide that I need to reference is the fact that we can, from a commercial point of view, we can look at this in two ways. The first way, typically, we license per core. So we add up all the cores that are available and across all the nodes, and then we license accordingly depending on what your requirements are. In a robo configuration, there's a sweet spot I'll come back to, but in a robo configuration, we can also refer you to edge licensing, which is basically per VM. So for any small environments, typically around the 15 VM mark, 15 to 20 maybe, edge per VM licensing is really commercially attractive. But the point I'll take, I don't know if you know this, Chris, but you can deploy a 3 node cluster. Okay. There might be reasons which I'll come on to in a moment. You deploy a 3 node cluster for 15 VMs. They might be low spec nodes, but there could be 15 VMs. So commercially, from a license, easy. You can grow that. You can scale that up to however many nodes you want, and then you're only still paying per edge licensing. So it's really good flexible use cases there for you.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's great that people get the choice and they're not punished for choosing. I'm going to choose it. I'm going to say a proper solution, but they're not punished by, because typically one of the things I hear is edge sites is like, yeah, but it costs too much.
Yeah,
I can't put something out there, because it's just too expensive, right? But actually, when you
yeah,
can license by VM or the capacity here on the slide, that suddenly becomes a lot more commercially attractive, as you said, and you can, again, you start off with the 5 VMs, right? Right. Add some more, scale up. I think that's a really, really interesting point. So if we move on to, I'll build out the slide because it's just easier to speak to when you're not controlling the
Yeah,
slide
sure.
sometimes, aren't you? So we've got the deployment options. Yeah. So three nodes is obviously the most resilient there, which is obvious, right? When you combine the stack together, you've got all that data there. But yeah, run us through the slide and kind of give us a bit. I know we kind of gone through subscription licensing a little bit, but we haven't talked about capacity-based licensing, so maybe we can take that on as well on this slide.
Yeah, certainly. So the capacity-based licensing it goes back to that per core model. So in the olden days, Nutanix used to license based on the number of cores and the amount of flash in terabytes that you had in each of the nodes. We did away with that because Nutanix, we were punishing our customers because a
Hmm.
lot of folk they wanted to go with straight SSD, all flash. Now it's mostly NVMe. So we don't do that anymore. It's just per core. Um, that can work in some scenarios. Usually, customers, prospects will work with the Nutanix account team, and the Nutanix account team will actually work through the options so that we can present you with a core-based licensing versus that edge per VM licensing model. And you can work out
Amazing.
what's best for you.
Yeah, we do a similar thing at Haiku as well, right? We can we
Yeah.
can we can license on core. So the thing about Haiku and Nutanix is we're very, very interlinked, right? We're
Mm.
very closely aligned in terms of the product stack, the commercial teams, the product teams, the marketing teams, everything. Hence why, we've got Kevin joining us on a webinar with me today. But yeah, we kind of try and mimic. So, if a customer is purchasing VM, VM licensing from Nutanix, we can mirror that, right? And we can say, yep, your Haiku licenses can mirror your VMs. But if you're also buying
Excellent.
core, you can license on core and Haiku as well. So you kind of don't have to worry about, going, oh, I'm going to get charged or punished by choosing one or the other from my backup vendor. We can mix and match
Yeah.
with that as well.
Yeah. Um, in terms of the deployment options, so this goes back to the small, medium, and large. Um, Levels of resiliency change depending on which model you go with. So in the large model, that's that's the ideal situation, right? So we do N plus one, and everything's built in. You can lose a whole node from that platform and still run all of your workloads on the remaining two nodes within that three node cluster. The single node, I am going to come back to two node in a moment, but the single node, again, there is a level of resiliency there. Effectively, think of it as a mirror. So you've got multiple drives in the one node, and then whatever happens on one set of drives will be mirrored onto the second set. So in terms of a failure, it can withstand a failure of a hard drive. Okay, so in this case, it could be an SSD or an NVMe. So it can withstand the failure of that, and it would keep going based on the data that's in the second set. So that's the level of resilience on the one node. The two node is interesting. It's kind of because it's medium, it's halfway house, right? Right?
Yeah,
So you're still running the workloads, and when we size it, when you're working with your Nutanix account team, you size it so that all of your workloads, all of your VMs can run comfortably on one of those nodes. So when two nodes are running, they're load balanced, right? Everything's
hmm,
sweet. But it can withstand the loss of a whole node, and you're left with that
still
one
running.
node. The only gotcha to a two node deployment is you need a witness. Right? That's the only caveat. You need a witness, typically in a separate failure domain. So it may be like a central HQ, but you don't need a witness for every two node cluster that you deploy. You can deploy, I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I think it's like 500, something
Wow.
ridiculous like that. You can deploy 500 two node clusters and have them all talk to the same witness. Okay, so there's different mixes, different flexible options. Um, the one note I've just seen there on that subscription licensing can't mix in the same cluster. It's very important. So you don't mix core-based licensing with your edge per VM. It's either or.
Perfect. Yeah, that concept of the witness VM being centrally and all the other sites kind of pulling into it is a lovely segue for me to talk about Haiku in a second. But that idea of centrally managing things is a
Yes.
concept that I want to take a bit further when we start to look at data protection, because it really does hark home to how most businesses want to operate with robo sites, like the
Mm,
central, the mothership, if you will, and then the rest of them, everything reports back.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
we're going to now discuss, but thank you, Kevin. I'm really interested. I hope everyone found the Nutanix Edge piece interesting, and obviously reach out to Kevin or if you have any more questions. But typically, when we look at legacy data protection at the edge or robo data protection, we've got all our sites like the map we showed earlier, right? We've got them all over the world. UK being HQ, as we've discussed. But typically, what would happen is we'd have some backup software, which is my icon in the top right of this slide, right? And we would then deploy our backup software to each one of these places, right? So if we're talking about the VM licensing, right? Like Kevin's been talking about, right? So maybe we might need 3 or 4 more VMs. So that's going to cost us on our licensing. We might go over that sweet spot. So suddenly our licensing doesn't become quite as simple, right? So we've got, we might be running 2, 3, 5 VMs for production or like, line of business apps or whatever that edge site's doing. But suddenly now we're almost going to double our footprint just because we need to run backup software here. It seems a bit bonkers, or even worse, we might have to deploy an actual physical box, doubling our physical footprint. It seems a bit bonkers. It seems a bit old-fashioned, if I will, to say that we need to deploy software at each one of these sites to run. When we're so limited on compute capacity, we want to try and keep them as small as possible, reduce power, reduce cooling, all those types of things we want to do. But yet we're going to double our footprint with our backup software. It seems a bit backwards, right? So now if we look at the challenges that data protection typically has at the edge. So it has a high management overhead. As we've just discussed there, if you have 15, 20, 500 sites that we've discussed earlier, and each one of those has a different instance of your backup software, right? You've got 5, 10, 15, 500 of those things to manage. It becomes incredibly difficult. It's not only a complex deployment, it's hard to manage, hard to maintain, right? And keeping up to date with all the jobs and schedules and all those things just becomes an absolute nightmare, almost impossible. And then we've got the TCO story. It uses compute and storage each one of those sites that can't be used by your production. So suddenly, Kevin's going to sell you size X box, and now he's got to sell you size Y because suddenly you've upped the spec and your sizing team have gone, hold on, now we've got backup on top of that. We've got even more things to worry about. So now you're going to need 2 of these size nodes rather than one of these size nodes, right? It takes additional manpower to install, configure, maintain. Yes, maybe it could be done remotely, but if you've got to get someone to rack and stack a piece of hardware because you're running an appliance on backup, then again, manpower, sending people all over the world, plane trips, all those types of things. And maybe you may be even forced to use alternative solutions. If you've got a one node cluster or maybe you haven't chosen Nutanix for one site, for instance, or whatever it might be, that maybe you're going to have disparate solutions, or maybe your management say actually deploying our central backup everywhere else is too expensive, it's too costly, too cumbersome. So we're going to choose a different solution. So suddenly now
Mm,
for IT, we've got 2 backup solutions, one for Robo, one for DC, 2 things to manage. It just becomes a bit of a mess. And then we have the efficiency and performance issues. Often we're copying data and sending data twice because Kevin discussed the business continuity, the disaster recovery piece, the replication piece separately to the backup. So we've got our backup software sending data, we've got our robo site sending data back centrally or to another site. So we're duplicating over that really slow link that we've already discussed, causes headaches, causes problems, and potentially doesn't meet our SLAs. And then we can't complete our backups on time. And then we have capacity and performance monitoring at each site. How do we manage the capacity? How do we manage performance across 5, 10, 15, 500 sites? All these things are headaches that anyone who's deployed or managed Robo will probably, hopefully, understand and be nodding along going, yeah, I know what you mean. So let's look at protecting Nutanix Robo or edge sites with HYCU. So how do we do it? So just a brief introduction to HYCU for Nutanix. So if anyone doesn't know, we're the #1 data protection platform for Nutanix workloads. We've kind of discussed briefly how aligned we are and how kind of how closely joined the 2 companies are. But essentially, when HYCU was formed 7 years ago, we did Nutanix. So all we did, we put our heart and soul into it, and Nutanix really is in our DNA for data protection. So we have deep integration with their APIs. We've got validated blueprints. We actually align again for another key point is customer experience. So I know Nutanix has an incredibly high 90+ NPS score. Not sure exactly what it is this week. But ours is around 91. I think it might have even gone up this week to 94. I got told earlier earlier this week as well. So again, the two companies aligning again on customer service and customer expectation and delivery. And then we also have military grade security. And as we discussed, security and cyber resilience is not just for the core data center, it's also crucial for the edge as well. And you can see all the different workloads that we cover on the slide here. So not just AHV, which most people are going to be talking about, just virtual machines, but also, robo sites and NUS, so objects and file storage as well at these remote sites. So how do we do it better? We're efficient. So essentially what happens is we can deploy a single HYCU instance, and then using the Nutanix replication, all that data gets fed in centrally to a central location. Okay, so typically what would happen is we set up the replication Nutanix that does an initial sync. Kevin, please interrupt me if I get any of this wrong. But
No, no, all good,
so
all good
you
so far.
set up your initial sync, right? So it might take a little bit of a while to get all of that data across, right? But if you're doing it
Yeah.
from scratch, you've got a footprint set of data or a baseline set of data, and then on a consistent basis, Nutanix is going to be replicating that data. So rather than doing it once a day or once a week, where we've got to, put a massive chunk of data on the network and get that across really quickly, what we're doing is we're drip feeding the data. And the way I say we, Nutanix in this instance, I say we because we can use the same thing, which I'll
Yeah.
cover in a sec. But essentially, they're drip feeding the data. So I like to think of it a bit like a Netflix movie, right, versus a download. A Netflix film, you just start it and it drip feeds the next 5 seconds, 10 seconds ahead of where you are, right? So you never catch up. But you've always got the data where you want it, right? You can always see the next 5 seconds and everything happens like that. Whereas if you had to download the film before you watch it, it's probably not you're not going to sit and watch it, right? Because it'll probably take you longer to download than watch the film. Well, especially in the UK, our internet's not as great as some places around the world. But essentially, what we can do is use that replication technology. So once that data is replicated into the central location, HYCU is deployed centrally, and then we can back up the replica workloads that are being replicated inwards from the central repository and store them centrally and store them in immutable formats and with anomaly detection, all the cool things you need from a really high level backup solution. But the key piece here is that we don't need to suddenly spin up HYCU software or hardware or any other backup vendor in all these remote sites. We have one instance controlling all these places. So exactly the same as what Kevin mentioned about the witness, we can have one HYCU controller controlling your Nutanix in the core and at the edge and even in the cloud and NC2 as well. So you can have one controller controlling everything from a central DC. So that minimizes your footprint. And again, I'll probably cover all this on this slide, so I might as well just build it out. But the first one, so efficient, as I said, we drip feed the data. So rather than sending two lots of data, we use the existing Nutanix replication technology that's already built in, which covers your DR use case. And we're essentially piggybacking off the back of that. The same data doesn't even need to traverse another network. We essentially catch it once it's in the wherever you sent it to, and back it up once it's been sent. So we don't have to worry about doing that and processing it locally. As I say, we replicate using the Nutanix tools. It's easy to configure. So inside of we haven't mentioned Prism, but that's Nutanix's kind of management plane. So the same place you would then manage your core site, you manage your remote sites, right? In Prism, that's the idea, is that you look at everything in one place. The same for HYCU, right? You look at HYCU, which looks suspiciously like Prism, almost like we designed it to look that way. Hint, hint, we did. So the learning curve is super low for any Nutanix admins out there. It will look very similar to what you're used to. But the same concepts apply. The management capability, you log into one single central HYCU and you can see all your sites. You can manage the data and policies and all that kind of stuff from a single place. So you haven't got policies at remote site 1, 2, 3, 400, 500, right? You've got a central place for global policies and apply that. And it might be that all your robo sites have the same policy, but it might be they all have different, but you don't have to manage them from all those different locations. Let me come on to cyber resiliency. I think this is really, really crucial. As we mentioned, data at the edge is still crucial data, if not sometimes the most important data there. So we still want to store data with cyber resilience capabilities, and we can do that. So one of the most popular deployment models for edge with Nutanix and HYCU is actually, Nutanix at the edge, Nutanix in the core, and then we have an instance of Nutanix object running in the core data center, right? And we back up all that data onto Nutanix object, apply object lock to it. So that is then locked away with a full immutability. HYCU has anomaly detection built in as well. We have complete validation of checkpoints that happen. And the beauty is you can recover any of that data anywhere you like.
Mm.
So you can recover it to the core. You recover it to a robo site, to a different robo site, for instance, as well. And then last point I want to hear is the low TCO. Because we don't have to deploy software at the edge, we don't have to run up your costs of licensing or add additional VMs or anything else like that. So it's super easy to do. And that's where you get the instant ROI as well. Deploy it centrally and away you go. Add your sites in. We hook in via Prism, just like Nutanix has. We hook into
Mhm.
that. We pull all the data from there, and we see everything that Nutanix sees. And we get that multiple use case fulfilled with essentially one lot of data replication, one lot of data movement. We can fill all those use cases. So the cyber, the backup, compliance, and disaster recovery, all of that can be fulfilled with just utilizing one lot of data replication, which is super efficient. And then to visualize that, essentially, we deploy our backup software, so HYCU in this instance, to the UK, and then all of these just report in using that drip feed replication that we've mentioned. All of these sites just report in as if they were doing replication as normal, and then we back it up centrally. And hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Hopefully that kind of makes sense to what we're doing. If it doesn't, please put anything in any questions you have in the chat. We will have time at the end. So I just want to kind of, how does that look holistically? So I'm going to build out the slide to here. So essentially, we use Nutanix native protection domain replication. So from RoboSite into the data center, that then creates replicas of those virtual machines that you want to then run for DR purposes potentially. HYCU then backs those up to a backup target. So Nutanix objects, Dell data domain, whatever it may be, right? And then when it comes to recovery, we essentially flip that back out. We can then restore it to any of the sites from central back out. If you're storing it in cloud, it doesn't matter. We can do the same thing as well, restore it back to any of those sites and also back into the data center. So if you wanted to do some forensic testing, you can run it in a clean room inside of your environment, for instance, or inside of your DC separated network. You can do fast restore. You can do all these different things because we're storing that data centrally in a location. And also you get the beauty of things like, compression, good compression. If you're using things like data domain or other backup targets, you could use then deduplication for that data as well. So you get those efficiencies of running things inside the data center rather than sizing, 500 gig at each 500 sites. Guess what? If you buy, you know, whatever that equates to, you buy 250 petabytes or 250 terabytes in a central location, it's much more efficient to do that than spread out all that data across the globe, right? And then if you want to protect Nutanix, so we use our system is called rCloud. So you can see here, it looks suspiciously, as I said, like Prism. Nice and easy to use, but super simple. And we've got all those use cases listed down the side you can see there. So application discovery, backup and recovery, DR, cyber, mobility and migrations if you want to move those workloads. Nutanix has native tools, but if maybe you want to move to somewhere that Nutanix didn't support or from somewhere, from somewhere completely different, you can do that, or a workload that isn't supported. Long-term retention, so you want to archive some of that data into Nutanix objects or into even long-term S3 storage or tape, we can do that as well. We've got the security and compliance ticked off. We actually have a compliance feature inside the platform itself, which tells you whether your workloads are in compliance or not. And then obviously what we've been talking about today, data protection at the edge. So hopefully that will make sense. So when we come to Nutanix Robo, simplicity and efficiency is key. I think that comes across from the Nutanix side and the HYCU side. Remember, this is a joint solution, right? This isn't just the HYCU or the Nutanix story. This is joint, making sure you are resilient at the edge. Instant ROI and low TCO. Nutanix are going to be incredibly good at reducing your TCO across all those robo sites comparatively across the marketplace. And then secure and easy compliance. We can help you with that as well. So data protection across edge and robo sites made super easy with Nutanix. And I just want to kind of discuss one last thing with you, which is the modern data estate. So most people are going to be we're talking about Robo, right? And there's going to be some on-premise workloads, the VMs that we've been discussing. But actually, a lot of people at the edge may even be using cloud and SaaS services as well, right? So how do we make sure that data is also protected and properly working? So data protection at HYCU is not just about Nutanix. It's a massive piece of our business, and it's the biggest piece of our history that we have. But we also the number one SaaS data protection vendor in the world as well. So we can help you discover and visualize your entire data estate from Nutanix all the way through to SaaS applications. We provide the protection for all those workloads, and we're giving you bulletproof backups. easy to recover, and data with one click. And we give you the freedom to move those workloads anywhere, anytime. So if we look at the modern data estate here, you can see we cover Google Workspace and Microsoft 365. So we currently use AWS to store that data if you wanted to. But all these other SaaS applications that you see here, so I'm going to pick up Atlassian, Okta, Entra ID, all these other ones that people are using all over the world. Suddenly all of those can be taken from the cloud and placed back into your data center under your control, maybe on a Nutanix objects cluster. So you suddenly take control back of your data, which typically isn't backed up, isn't protected with those vendors. And you suddenly take control of that data, make sure you're in compliance, because guess what? It's not optional anymore. It's the law to back up your data, even stuff in the cloud and SaaS apps as well. And then even if you have IaaS as well, you can go straight to cloud or even an NC2 object instance as well. So that is all the slides that we had. So if you wanted to try HYCU, then feel free to scan the QR codes on the screen. I know Nutanix have a test drive available for all their software as well. So I think we're having a technical issue putting the link in the chat. But essentially, it's super easy. I've done it before. If you literally go into Google or ChatGPT or whatever and say, "Hey, I want to test drive Nutanix," it will bring you right to the page where you need to, and you can just deploy all of them. So maybe Kevin, you might be able to pop it in the chat if you can, if you can. If not, don't worry. But yeah, Google
Yeah,
Nutanix
I
test
am
drive.
trying. I am trying, but unsuccessful
Perfect.
so far.
Yeah. So yeah, onto a couple of questions. So first one, Davey, yes, you can get a copy of the presentation. It'll be sent out afterwards with the recording as well. Absolutely. And then someone else has asked, is it supported to have Robo backup locally at each remote office to minimize RTO and centralized backups to maximize resiliency and improve security with air-gapped copy? Yes, completely. It's all down to architecture, right? It's all down to each individual use case. So you have the ability to do both with HYCU. So you can have a local instance, a local copy for instant recovery, minimize RTO back onto there for, for maybe simple things like file level restore or whatever. That's absolutely fine. You can do that, but also you can have them centralized as well. So if that is a use case, get in touch with us. We can help you with our design team and our solution engineers or advisory engineers from Nutanix to help you out. But yeah, we really do go in conjunction with Nutanix a lot of these customers as well. So yes, absolutely. Kevin, do you have I think you have a question here that you got previously. Do you want to just ask that one out in the open about
Yeah,
Nutanix?
so one of the most popular questions we actually have is this one on updates. So the question is, how do we control and manage updates across multiple remote sites? So we can. There's a number of different ways. With Nutanix specifically, we have something called the lifecycle management component of Nutanix, and that will control the upgrade process from firmware, hardware device drivers, through to the hypervisor, through to the Nutanix magic source on top. You can control that centrally. So again, going back to having a central HQ with a Prism management control plane, you can use that to connect into all of your remote sites and control that upgrade process. But also, interestingly, for a lot of customers, when they think about Robo, when they use Robo, quite a few of them are in dark sites. So, dark sites, no internet access. So how do they control that? Well, some customers have a private or a dark network, if you like, that allow them to connect all of the remote sites back to a central HQ. Well, what you can do is then within that central HQ, you can deploy like a web server, if you like. So you can get into the web server, download what LCM updates you need, and then they can filter out across all of the different remote sites. So again, making it easy whether you're in dark sites or whether you do have internet access. And the last important note on this is the fact that when I was a young boy, I'm a man of a certain age now, but when I was a young boy, when we used to update stuff, we had to go to various different websites and figure out which versions were compatible with which versions. Not gone are those days. So with Nutanix, again, lifecycle management, it will intelligently do an inventory of what you've got now, all the different versions that you're running, and then it will tell you which are the compatible options available to you. and then it'll go ahead and either download them directly or again going back to that web server, allowing you that flexible approach. So yeah, we've got that covered.
Amazing. So I don't see any more questions that have come in. So unless anyone has any last questions, I'll wait just like maybe 30 seconds in case someone's just typing one out now. But um, if you do have a question, feel free to post it now, and if we don't get to it now, we'll make sure we answer on follow up. Um, but I'd like to thank Kevin for joining us, and I'd like to thank everyone who stayed on the line to hear. Oh, one thing. Can you ask something about full training course? Yes, we do have a training course available for HYCU and certification available. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to find that on Google HYCU certification. I don't have the link to hand, but yes, we do have a training course and certification available for HYCU, and I know Nutanix do as well because I've done it myself.
Absolutely.
You get certified on both of those aspects to really up level and upskill yourself. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's joined us, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. And Kevin, it's been a pleasure, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you very much, Chris. Cheers
Thank
now.
you, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.